War. It is a word that evokes fear, sorrow, and destruction. The mere mention of it conjures images of chaos, suffering, and the loss of countless lives. Throughout history, humanity has been plagued by conflict, each war leaving an indelible mark on the world. From the ancient battles of antiquity to the modern-day skirmishes, the shadow of war has loomed large over civilizations. The 20th century, in particular, witnessed two global conflicts of unprecedented scale and devastation: World War I and World War II. These wars were not just battles between armies. They were cataclysmic events that reshaped the very fabric of society. These wars reshaped the geopolitical landscape, toppled empires, and ushered in a new era defined by the ever-present threat of nuclear annihilation. Cities were reduced to rubble, and the world was forever changed by the horrors of these conflicts. From the trenches of Europe to the beaches of the Pacific, millions fought and died in these conflicts. The bravery and sacrifice of these soldiers are etched into the annals of history, serving as a testament to the human spirit's resilience in the face of unimaginable adversity. Understanding the causes and consequences of these wars is not just an academic exercise. It is a moral imperative. By studying the past, we honor the memory of those who suffered and ensure that their sacrifices were not in vain. By examining the events that led to these global catastrophes and their lasting impacts, we gain a deeper understanding of the human condition and the fragility of peace. The aftermath of these wars saw nations grappling with the immense task of rebuilding and healing. This essay will delve into the intricate web of events that led to the world wars, exploring the key players, pivotal battles, and the profound consequences that continue to shape our world today. The decisions made by leaders, the strategies employed by generals, and the experiences of ordinary soldiers all played a role in the unfolding of these monumental events. By understanding the past, we can hopefully navigate the future. The lessons learned from these conflicts are invaluable, offering insights into the complexities of human nature and the importance of striving for a more peaceful world. The lessons learned from these global conflicts serve as a stark reminder of the human cost of war and the importance of diplomacy, cooperation, and understanding in our increasingly interconnected world. As we move forward, it is crucial to remember the past and work tirelessly to prevent the recurrence of such devastating events. The early 20th century was a time of great change and upheaval in Europe. The continent was a mosaic of cultures, languages, and political ambitions, each vying for dominance and recognition. Cities were bustling with innovation and progress, yet beneath this veneer of prosperity, tensions were simmering. The seeds of conflict were sown long before the first shots were fired in 1914. The political landscape was a powder keg, ready to explode. Leaders paraded their military might, showcasing their readiness for conflict, while behind closed doors, they navigated a labyrinth of diplomatic relations. These seeds took root in a complex interplay of nationalism, imperialism, militarism, and a tangled web of alliances. Treaties were signed, alliances were forged, and maps were redrawn, each move calculated to gain an upper hand in the ever-shifting balance of power. Nationalism, a powerful force that fueled both unity and division, was on the rise. Across Europe, people felt a strong sense of loyalty and devotion to their nation, often at the expense of others. This fervent nationalism created an environment of competition and mistrust among nations. Citizens celebrated their national identities with fervor, waving flags and singing anthems, while political leaders harnessed this energy to further their own agendas. The idea of national superiority took root, leading to a dangerous sense of entitlement and rivalry. This fervent nationalism created an environment of competition and mistrust among nations, particularly in the Balkans, a region simmering with ethnic and religious tensions. The Balkans, often referred to as the powder keg of Europe, was a hotspot for conflict, with various groups vying for independence and dominance. Adding fuel to the fire was the race for empires. European powers, driven by economic and political ambitions, competed fiercely for colonies in Africa, Asia, and the Pacific. The quest for new territories was not just about land, but also about resources, markets, and strategic advantage. European powers, driven by economic and political ambitions, competed fiercely for colonies in Africa, Asia, and the Pacific. This scramble for territory created friction and resentment, pushing the world closer to the brink. The colonies became pawns in a larger game of power, with local populations often caught in the crossfire. This scramble for territory created friction and resentment, pushing the world closer to the brink. Political cartoons of the era depicted the great powers as greedy and aggressive, highlighting the growing tensions and the fragile nature of international relations. Militarism, the glorification of military strength, and the belief that war was both inevitable and glorious, pervaded many European nations. Military parades and drills became common sights as countries showcased their readiness for conflict. Countries engaged in an arms race, rapidly expanding their armies and navies. Naval shipyards and army barracks buzzed with activity as new ships were launched and soldiers were trained. The belief that military might equated to national strength became deeply ingrained. This militarization created a climate of fear and suspicion, where even the slightest provocation could have disastrous consequences. Diplomatic meetings grew tense as nations eyed each other warily, each one aware that a single misstep could lead to catastrophe. As tensions escalated, a complex web of alliances emerged, entangling nations in a delicate balance of power. These alliances, meant to deter aggression, would ultimately prove to be a catalyst for war. The intricate network of treaties and agreements meant that a conflict involving one nation could quickly draw in others. These alliances, meant to deter aggression, would ultimately prove to be a catalyst for war. When the first shots were fired in 1914, the world was plunged into a conflict of unprecedented scale, forever changing the course of history. The road to World War I was paved with ambition, rivalry, and a tragic inevitability. The powder keg of Europe, primed for conflict, finally exploded on June 28, 1914, in the seemingly insignificant city of Sarajevo. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, and his wife Sophie were assassinated by Gavrilo Princip, a Serbian nationalist. This act of violence, while shocking, was not entirely unexpected given the rising tensions in the Balkans. Austria-Hungary, determined to crush Serbian nationalism and assert its dominance in the region, saw the assassination as an opportunity for decisive action. Backed by Germany, Austria-Hungary issued an ultimatum to Serbia, one deliberately designed to be unacceptable. Serbia, fearing for its independence, appealed to Russia for support. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand set off a chain reaction that quickly spiraled out of control. The intricate web of alliances that had been woven over decades transformed a regional conflict into a global war. Germany, bound by its treaty with Austria-Hungary, declared war on Russia, which had mobilized its army in support of Serbia. France, obligated by its alliance with Russia, declared war on Germany. Great Britain, fearing a German-dominated Europe, declared war on Germany after the invasion of neutral Belgium. Within a month, the major powers of Europe were at war. World War I, initially envisioned as a short and decisive conflict, quickly devolved into a brutal war of attrition. The early optimism faded as the reality of modern warfare set in. The romantic notions of glory and heroism were shattered by the harsh realities of trench warfare, poison gas attacks, and unprecedented casualties. Soldiers faced the constant threat of death, not just from enemy fire, but from the very environment they fought in. On the Western Front, a 400-mile network of trenches stretched from the English Channel to Switzerland. These trenches became the defining feature of the war, a symbol of the stalemate that gripped the conflict. Soldiers on both sides faced unimaginable horrors, constant bombardment, disease, and the ever-present threat of enemy fire. The trenches were often filled with mud, rats, and the stench of death, and the ever-present threat of enemy fire. The psychological toll was immense, with many soldiers suffering from what was then known as shell shock, now recognized as PTSD. Battles like the Somme and Verdun became synonymous with unimaginable carnage, with millions of lives lost for minimal territorial gains. These battles were marked by their sheer scale and the devastating loss of life. With millions of lives lost for minimal territorial gains, The term "no man's land" became a grim reality, a deadly expanse between the opposing trenches where few survived. The Eastern Front was equally brutal, characterized by vast distances and harsh weather conditions. The fighting here was marked by its own unique challenges, including the severe Russian winters. Russia, initially fielding a massive army, suffered heavy losses against the German and Austro-Hungarian forces. The Russian soldiers faced not only the enemy, but also logistical nightmares and internal strife, suffered heavy losses against the German and Austro-Hungarian forces. The Eastern Front saw some of the war's most significant battles, with entire armies being decimated. The war also expanded beyond the borders of Europe, drawing in colonies and sparking conflicts in the Middle East, Africa, and Asia. The global nature of the conflict meant that no corner of the world was untouched, drawing in colonies and sparking conflicts in the Middle East, Africa, and Asia. The involvement of colonial troops added a new dimension to the war, as soldiers from around the world were drawn into the conflict, Africa and Asia. These regions saw their own battles and hardships, contributing to the global scale of the war. New technologies, from machine guns and tanks to airplanes and submarines, transformed warfare, making it more deadly than ever before. The introduction of these technologies changed the face of battle, making it more mechanized and impersonal. Transformed warfare, making it more deadly than ever before. The machine gun, in particular, became a symbol of the war's brutality, capable of mowing down waves of soldiers in seconds. The world had never seen such bloodshed and destruction. Entire cities were reduced to rubble, and the landscape of Europe was forever changed. As the war dragged on, the human cost became unbearable. Hospitals overflowed with the wounded, and the medical staff struggled to cope with the sheer number of casualties. Civilians, too, were caught in the crossfire, suffering from food shortages, disease, and the constant threat of enemy attacks. The home front became a battleground in its own right, with civilians enduring air raids and bombings, and the constant threat of enemy attacks. The war's impact on civilian life was profound, with entire communities displaced and lives shattered. The world watched in horror as the war to end all wars consumed an entire generation. The aftermath left a deep scar on the collective consciousness, a reminder of the devastating cost of conflict.